close enough. Welcome to the Wednesday, December 7th meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Planning Committee meeting. Public comments. I do not have any speaker cards. Is there any in the public who would like to address the committee at this time? I don't see anybody rushing up, so we'll move on from there. Item number C, approval of the minutes.
Second.
First and a second. All in favor? Aye. Consent calendar. I have a first by Mitchell. So much pressure up here when I have to call names out. Second, there's such a crowd out here. Second and Hudson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. On to 4.0 is an update of the work plan for the completion of the countywide transportation plan. Mr. Engelman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, and welcome, board members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning. I'm here to present to you tonight the updated work plan for completion of the countywide transportation plan, and we're proposing to you that we get back to work on this and put it together in the year 2017 and have it done by the end of the year. In your packet, you'll see a little bit of the history, how we embarked on this. We really started the effort in 2012. Turn the clock back even further, the last adopted countywide plan was in 2009, and we do try to update it every 4 or 5 years. So we began working on the last update in 2012, and we released a draft in July of 2014. We went through a very significant public outreach effort with the help of a consultant team led by Graybo and Scott, and we were poised to adopt the countywide plan in December 2014. That adoption was delayed so that we could have additional time to absorb the significant volume of comments that we received through that public engagement process. And we also wanted to begin considering development of a financially constrained project list. You might recall the countywide plan had about $12 billion in projects, and we knew how much money we had in the RTP, and we knew how much money we had for Measure J, but we really didn't know how to pare that list down to a financially constrained list of projects that could serve to show what our priorities are and also help us with developing a transportation expenditure plan. At the same time, MTC changed its CTP guidelines, and there were some requirements there that we wanted to include in our new CTP. So we started again down the path in 2015 of developing a revised CTP. In parallel, the authority was directing us to develop this TEP, and we started sketching out the $2.8 billion in projects and programs that we could afford if a sales tax measure were to be approved by the voters. And that continued through the close of 2015 when we were about to release the draft of the CTP. And at the same time, along came this bill called SB 743, which said for CEQA purposes, you really can't use or shouldn't use level of service anymore to evaluate the impacts of projects. You should switch to something like vehicle miles traveled. Well, our entire plan is based in large part on level of service because we have these action plans for routes of regional significance that you've all worked on at your regional committee levels. And those action plans use level of service and delay to analyze traffic congestion, and it's all tied into the CEQA process. So we're now ready to start looking for a preferred methodology for assessing traffic impacts, and that would respond to the requirements of the implementation of SB 743. We don't know exactly what that is yet, but the Office in Planning and Research is suggesting that for CEQA purposes, we should use vehicle miles traveled instead of level of service. So we'd like to go out to the regional committees and start discussing that. So that kind of brings us up to today, and talk about the schedule for calendar 2017. We want to restart the CTP process. We'd like to update the action plans, bring them into compliance or conformity with SB 743. We want to issue a draft countywide transportation plan that's new, that's innovative, that's easy to read, probably be a lot shorter than the last one, not as much text, something that we can port out on the internet, so there's not a lot of printing cost associated with it. And we think if we start in January, we can probably have a draft plan ready by the middle of 2017, around June. And we'd also, in parallel with that, prepare a draft EIR. For the last plan effort, we had what we called a supplemental EIR, which was based largely upon the 2009 countywide plan. And since now 6 years have gone by, or 7 years have gone by, we think we can no longer build upon that 2009 EIR because too many things have changed. So we're talking about doing a full EIR. It's a policy level or planning based EIR, program level EIR, not a project level EIR, and issue that in September. And then we would have comments, an opportunity for public comments in September and October, and bring back the final countywide plan to you in December of 2017. As I said, we want to make this plan different than the last one. Some of you and some of us were just at the Focus on the Future conference, and there was a lot of discussion about new technologies, use of data, use of big data, the introduction of autonomous passenger car vehicles, as well as shared transit vehicles that are also autonomous. And what will the impact of those be on our future traffic levels? What will they do in terms of influencing land use? We're proposing to have the plan address those and at least perhaps create a scenario that tells us what 2040 would look like if autonomous vehicles really take off. And we're trying to figure out how to model that and how to tell you more about it. So the next steps will be to procure a new planning consultant through an RFP process, get going on the action plans, come back to you with the finances. We show you on page 4.4 the cost of the plan so far and the future cost. To date, we've spent about $5 million on the CTP update, and that includes the Graybill and Scott public engagement effort. And to complete the effort, we're figuring it's, roughly speaking, it's going to be another $800,000 for a new countywide plan and a new EIR. So total estimated cost by the time we're all done would be $5.9 million. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any comments.
Comments or questions at this time?
You're requiring action, or is this just an informational item? It sounds like you're just an informational item, but then when you...
We're not asking you to approve any of these dollar amounts at this point. We want you to look at the proposed work plan and schedule of activities and get your in-concept approval. All of the dollar figures will be coming back to you in January with specific contracts.
And that's fine. So the action is that you want some direction.
well, we want you to look at this and see whether or not you agree in concept with getting this thing started again and finishing it.
It's
in the
okay.
calendar year.
I just looked at the agenda and it says action, so that's where I was confused.
Yeah, we put that there so that you can take action if you wish.
Thank you. It looks okay.
Schoenbrunn. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm David Schoenbrunn, President of Transdev. I will comment on this item, and I will extend that to cover the open time comments I would have made had I not made a wrong turn in the dark. We're very concerned about the direction that this staff report has. As certain as you are that the sun will come up tomorrow morning, you can be equally certain that every new subdivision built in this county will make traffic worse. The structure of your planning process, starting with bottoms up, means there is no way that you will be able to address this issue. Therefore, your plan, by definition, will end up with a worse situation, and that's because of how you structure it. I wrote this board during the EPAC process and informed you of the TEP's failure to reduce greenhouse gases. You were obviously unmoved at that time. The issue is you can't have any influence on the future spatial distribution of development, which is what will generate VMT and traffic congestion, using your existing structure. Creating a plan that responds to wish lists of various jurisdictions, by its very nature, cannot solve goals that are held county-wide or region-wide. And so it's bound to fail because it assumes several key elements. One, that local land use decisions are unrelated to county-wide policy and performance goals. And two, a focus on traffic, which is now obsolete after SB 743. Also, the whole idea of conforming to the sustainable community strategy in the regional transportation plan is something that will not come up as part of the way that you have this process structured. So I want to say here and now that I'm confident that if you go forward as suggested in the staff report, that it will result in a failed plan. I'd like to now switch to comments I prepared.
Mr. Chair, can I ask him a question? Because Mr. Schoenbrunn?
Yes.
What do you mean by countywide policies?
Well, for example, the entire world of transportation planning has changed radically, particularly in the last year. And with the production of the statewide transportation plan called CTP 2040, there's now a recognition that the state cannot meet its greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals unless VMT is reduced.
Okay, but what do you...
That is a profoundly different stance for a planning process to take place under.
I understand that, but when you talk about countywide policies, I'm trying to figure out, I mean, that's something the state says, but I'm unclear on what you mean by a countywide policy.
What I'm saying is, if you were to adopt goals, which you have not yet, as I understand it, if you were to adopt goals, the existing structure of your planning process will not achieve those goals.
Okay, but
because of the decentralized nature of what drives it.
All right, but when you tell, I'm the county supervisor.
I understand.
So when you tell me there's a countywide policy out there, that's where my question is. There isn't a countywide policy.
And there needs to be.
And that's fine, but you didn't say there needs to be. The way I understood you was that there already was one.
I think there was an article that might have been missing.
Thank you.
These are open time comments that relate directly to this agenda item. I notice you haven't agendized any discussion of why Measure X failed. As the leader of one of the organizations that opposed X, here are a few of the reasons a $0 campaign was able to defeat a $1.1 million campaign. The CCTA board rejected the input that it received from the EPAC. As a result, there was no environmental support for the measure and active opposition from our organization. The board was noticeably hostile to employee unions and their concerns. There was no constrained and prioritized finance plan, which is why the board arrogated to itself the power to amend the expenditure plan on a routine basis. Thank you. TransDef's biggest criticism was the board's refusal to do anything to combat the growth in VMT as a result of future development. That guaranteed that business as usual would keep making traffic worse. In addition, the expenditure plan rejected any responsibility to reduce future greenhouse gases. In the absence of a change in attitude and policy, it is likely that future similar measures will fail as well. If invited, I would be pleased to come speak with staff and/or board members to go into greater detail. Thank you.
Any other discussion on 4.0?
I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, I know that a lot of things are happening, excuse me, very quickly with VMT, greenhouse gases. I mean, both Karen and I sit on ABAG. We hear it all the time. But, yeah, and the Air Board, well, the Air District. And I'm treading around giving people their own opinions, but to tell me that nothing's happened until the last year is a little hard to swallow when the business as usual model, if we hadn't changed anything from 2005, called for something like 527 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and now we're under 400, and I think the level that they're fooling around with is cap and trade, if we ever pull it off, is at 369. I mean, those are some pretty large cuts into greenhouse gas emissions. I know in my city, we're looking at changing where the sites were for a lot of this development that would cut VMT virtually to nothing, but I can't change everybody's job to be in Bishop Ranch from wherever they might commute, but at least people are taking steps in the right direction. To say nothing, it's hard to buy into that. I think that the direction for the countywide transportation plan, we spent hours on this thing, which is what I think you're asking for tonight, Martin, that we should start it in April. We should stick to the schedule, pretty much what you have here, and see what the plan is before we rip it up. I mean, I think that it's probably a lot easier to deal with something in front of you than it is the hypothetical. I'm ready to advance this. I don't wait to hear what everybody else had. Well, that we have a first and a second. I'll wait to hear other people's comments. But yeah, and you know, I think that the staff is heading in the right direction. Measure X didn't make it, but we still have, what, 63% of the people said they did like it. I think our problem's in messaging, not what we were trying to do. And we'll find out when the numbers come out next week. That's the only reason it's not on the agenda. We don't know what they are yet. I don't even know if they finished counting it, but that's another story. So we'll see what it is, and, if we did something wrong, we'll correct it. But I'm not ready to throw out that expenditure plan at this time because the measure didn't make it. I think we did a pretty good job on that. I think we've pretty far along on the countywide transportation plan. We'll finish it next year, and we'll see where we're at. And if there's something needs to be fixed, we'll fix it.
Any other comments? No follow-up. I'll agree with David there that I think we need to keep moving forward. If changes are required, we can make changes as we go along, but like he said, we don't need to toss it out and start all over again. We've dedicated a lot of time and energy and resources into moving this thing forward, and I think moving forward expeditiously and is a better approach rather than starting all over again. Any other comments? If not, I have a first by Hudson, second by Mitchoff. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. 5.0 update on MTC's Planned Bay Area 2040 preferred scenario. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Romick. Good evening, Commissioners. As you might remember, we brought the draft preferred scenario of Planned Bay Area 2040 to you in September. As in late August, MTC and ABAG released their draft preferred scenario of the 2017 RTP, which is also known as Planned Bay Area 2040. As with the last RTP, Planned Bay Area 2040 is guided by SB 375 policies to develop a sustainable community strategy in order to reduce per capita greenhouse gases emissions and house the region's population at all income levels. And that's done by focusing growth around transit primarily in priority development areas. And that goes along with a complementary set of transportation investments. At the September Authority meeting, a comment letter was approved for submittal to MTC and ABAG regarding some of our concerns about components of the draft plan, and that's namely the inclusion of more households in the county and reducing the number of jobs that our local jurisdictions have been planning for and anticipating in the future, and all of the effects that that may have on our transportation network, average trip lengths, and VMT. MTC and ABAG have now released the final preferred scenario and addressed those comments. The final preferred scenario was approved by the Joint Executive Committee back on November 17th. So now I'll just go over highlights of the preferred scenario and focus on the changes from the draft for the region and for Contra Costa. So on the slide, on the screen, you can see this is MTC's slide where they are pointing out the specific issues that they addressed between the draft and the final. There were some technical corrections on pipeline data, which is future growth estimates, where that growth may take place, and the assumptions that cities are zoning for, and how that coincides with the projections that were included in the plan. And the second bullet there, the request to increase jobs housing ratios to improve commutes and to boost regional affordability. That was one of our main comments. They kept increasing the number of households forecast for the county and reduced the number of jobs, and our main comment was to get those two more in sync with each other. And then there's the idea of action plans at the bottom, which we didn't comment on but was discussed at the November 17th meeting. So the primary changes, kind of a global look here. Over there on the left, they reduced job growth in San Francisco, or tamed it a bit. They increased job growth in the cities of San Jose and Oakland, but lowered the forecasts in the Silicon Valley area. Over there on the right, they reduced housing growth in the North Bay, especially in Sonoma County, which, along with us, had a very high rate of household growth forecast. And then the bullet that we like the most down there, they shifted housing growth from Contra Costa to other high population, job-rich counties, which is better for shorter commutes and lower VMT. So we still have that number there on the left, the 820,000 new households that have to be fit in to the region somewhere. So on those bar charts you see in the middle, the lower number is what was in the draft, the upper number is what's in the final preferred scenario. So you can see that they're still beefing up the household numbers in the big three cities. But there in the green, they lowered the number by 3% that's in the what they call the inland coastal delta, which is the majority of Contra Costa County. And they did up the numbers that will be in PDAs. Here's the employment side of things, planning for 1.3 million new jobs. Once again, the big three cities are still increasing their numbers of jobs. But the Bayside, which is the blue shading, and you can see on the map over there, is mainly Silicon Valley and the peninsula and kind of the Fremont, Hayward area. They did reduce the growth there. And in the green, they did increase our job projections, which went right along with our comments. So we were pleased to see that. And so now this chart here shows what's going on in Contra Costa by jurisdiction. The highlight is in yellow at the bottom, and just highlighting the fact that our housing forecast was reduced by 13% between the draft and the final. So they definitely listened to our comments. They kind of did it across the board, so I didn't highlight any individual city. On the employment side of things, they raised our employment, you can see at the bottom, by 23%, which pleased us as well, getting the jobs closer to the households. The main highlights there at the bottom, City of San Ramon has an astronomical increase in jobs, and we believe that was based on a technical error that was in the draft where they had the number of jobs in Commissioner Hudson City actually going down over time. And we pointed that out, and now it looks more, it's more in alignment with what the city is anticipating in their general plan. Walnut Creek also has a pretty healthy increase of 3,700 new jobs in Walnut Creek, which is a transit accessible location kind of in the middle of the county. So that's definitely a lot closer to where the jobs were going before, which was outside of the county.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I mean, I don't dispute. What we're being told at ABAG is that they are using a model called Urban Sim.
Yes.
And that Urban Sim is based on all of the regions or jurisdictions' general plans. So I'm glad that they increased our job numbers, but I'm trying to figure out this 23% we'll have 23% of the jobs. Is that what that means?
That's an increase between the growth rate between the draft and
okay,
the
that's
final.
what I thought.
Yeah.
So San Ramon, Mr. Hudson, why is that an NA?
Where?
In the what I'm looking at. Oh, see on our staff report it says NA. Up there it says a 25%. No, I'm looking at jobs.
Jobs.
Right.
Yeah. On our staff report, it doesn't have 1,425%.
That might have been a place.
It's okay. Yeah, it could have been. Although the numbers are correct. The negative 18.
At the time, we didn't have the mathematical science
And
to
that's
do a
fine.
percentage
I'm glad to
increase
see.
from a negative number, but
I
then we
didn't look
figured
at
it out.
this. But the concern I do have, and this isn't anything that staff could deal with, but Oakley's got negative 28. I'm thinking the county's initiative, Northern Waterfront Initiative, along with the cities, Antioch is only an 8%. Oakley is a negative 28. And Pittsburgh is a negative 18. I haven't even looked at Martinez. Martinez is 0. I'm just noting for the record that I don't even think this is accurate.
No, and I agree with you. We have the whole railroad corridor, including the DuPont property and all the acres along
All
there
this stuff is going to bring.
that we're actively working on right now to bring new jobs in, and so I'm kind of curious as to where the numbers came from, but and why we reduced in that instead of it growing even more.
Well, that's it. If they started with Urban Sims, we sent them a letter and said, hey, wait a minute, not quite right. We want more jobs here. Then what do? Press a button, Contra Costa wants more jobs? I don't mean to be facetious, but how did they come up with these? And I still don't think it's very accurate. I'm not against Walnut Creek getting 107%, but I'm noting for the record, and thank you, Mr. Romick, these numbers are still not accurate. And I don't know if we want to further communicate that or just it's better to leave it alone, because in the end, this is what I'm being told. Dave, correct me if I'm wrong. This is sort of an interim step. We're basically going through an exercise that doesn't have a lot of teeth because we'll be doing another Plan Bay Area that will have teeth. We just have to do this kind of thing. And maybe we'll have more numbers to put into it. But at this point, I don't agree with these percentages, at least along the northern waterfront.
Right.
That's a good point, and I will say that our comments weren't specific to each city. Mm-hmm. Our comments were more global for the county, and we did point out San Ramon just because it was so, it was obvious. The Urban Sim land use model is a market-based model, so that's their the reason why they say there's many more jobs, in the central core of the Bay Area, and not here in Contra Costa. And they did some adjustments on zoning and base year numbers, as I mentioned, which could have affected the future year forecasts. I will point out, though, only I believe 5 of our cities did submit actual individual comment letters as during the comment process. So we did kind of global comments, but individual cities didn't necessarily comment on their numbers. But they did work with ABAG, throughout the process to make sure at least their base year numbers were correct.
Mr. Chair? Yeah. One of the reasons why I didn't jump up and down about a comment is I was trying to figure out if this helped us, or if this was in our favor or not to be so far out. I mean, if you want to put 23,000, whatever jobs, what does that come out to? 8 million square feet of commercial? Let's talk mitigation. I'm there. Let's do it.
And I did notice that the majority of those jobs that they put into San Ramon came from just across the county line. They lowered the numbers in Dublin and Pleasanton. Yeah. So
I'm sure that
kind of
there's a supervisor who's going to have something to say.
Yeah, but
He doesn't miss that.
so I'll move on to the investment side of things, the transportation side. I'll just point out that the draft plan was a $310 billion plan. It's now $303 billion with $75 billion in discretionary funds. The majority is already committed. The reason the plan went from $310 billion to $303 billion is because the draft plan assumed passage of all of the region's transportation measures and bonds that were on the ballot in November. So after the election, they reached out to Contra Costa and San Francisco counties because we had the 2 measures that did not pass, and MTC decided to lower the number by that $7 million, which amounts to the tax revenue that would have been generated in San Francisco and Contra Costa counties. They did leave in the Santa Clara and the Measure RR and some other smaller and Oakland transportation sales tax or bond. So the way that $303 billion is distributed, 90% is to operate, maintain, and modernize both the transit and the roadway network in the Bay Area, and 10% was for system expansion. So that's just kind of a snapshot of how it's being spent. And here we're trying to tell the story of what happened to our projects. I will note that this is different than what is in your packet, so please refer to the color copy that's on the dais. We made some adjustments based on internal discussions. But basically, we have on the columns, we have three categories. The first is the initial RTP submittal back in October of 2015. We submitted a financially constrained list of our projects, and that's what's in the RTP column. Vision is kind of what's on deck but is not included in the RTP. So the next set of columns is the draft preferred scenario, which was released this summer. And what we commented on, and included Measure X. And the final column is the final two columns is the final preferred scenario, which was adopted in November, and does not include Measure X. So then the three groups of projects as you go down, the top set of projects are projects that let me grab my notes here, that were originally included on the vision list, so not in the RTP, then were moved to the financially constrained RTP list due to Measure X funding that was assumed, and now were removed from the RTP back onto the vision list. So they went from one to the other and back again. The second group of projects or programs were on our original submittal, but with much smaller scopes. Those scopes were then increased in the draft preferred scenario due to Measure X assumed passage. And now in the final preferred scenario, they were rescoped and reduced in scope and included in the RTP. So that's good news. The third set of projects were projects that were originally on the vision, so not in the RTP. For the draft preferred scenario, they were moved to the financially constrained list in the RTP due to assumption of Measure X funding. Those projects have now been rescoped, reduced in scope, and included in the RTP under the final preferred scenario. So I hope that kind of makes sense. It's kind of a difficult story to tell because things jumped around a lot. So those are the highlights and the changes, both on the land use and the transportation side. MTC will be taking this scenario of land use and transportation investments and moving forward with developing the EIR alternatives early next year, with full adoption of the plan expected around July of next year. And staff's recommendation tonight is to accept the report. I can take any questions.
Questions to staff? Motions?
I think it's just to
Just
receive
accept
it.
it.
Yeah. Did anybody want to speak to this? It's like old hat. We went around the room for about 2 or 3 hours with comments on it. And the only thing you didn't bring up that was stressed, the very last thing that was stressed, because I was the last speaker, was that the CMAs get more resources, which I think was also in your letter. So we'll see how, out of 50 people or whatever spoke, if anybody was listening. But I thought it was a good letter, and a lot of comments. I think there's going to be more. I'm kind of listening to my right. There's some comments. Some of the numbers just look strange. I mean, and they did last time. I can remember complaining here because I thought our numbers were off. And it's that problem of Doherty Valley is done in the county and then annexed, and I don't think they pick up on that motion. But, if you guys want to build 23,000 more jobs, we'll find a way.
And I would mention that, at the city level, we definitely do encourage the cities to communicate with ABAG on those allocations.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just chime in here for a moment, Martin Engelman. The numbers that you see here are going to be adopted by ABAG and MTC and it's the same numbers we plan to use for our countywide plan. So we're updating the land use forecast from projections 2013 RTP to the 2017 RTP. That's one of the shifts we're making for this next plan. And so these are kind of starting to gel and get set, and comment period is actually over. So, but we want to make you aware that this is what we're going to run with.
Mr. Chair, and I totally agree with you, Martin. I mean, we're going to be dealing with numbers. Again, I don't mean to diminish the work of everybody. To me, it's an exercise, and policy decisions will have to be made as we move forward. And I'm just looking at some of these job numbers. I mean, Mr. Leone and I were just talking. I mean, 230 more jobs for Concord. Again, that goes to my question of how did they come up with that? A 1% change. Maybe they've already included the Naval Weapons Station jobs in 2040, but how did they get 230 more? So I understand that you need to move forward and use these numbers. If we're doing really well, this county may have more jobs than were projected, and that will be a good thing.
Point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
So Concord gets 41,230 more jobs between
No, I understand
now
that,
and
but from the draft to the
40.
final,
Okay.
that goes to my question, where did they come up with these 230 more jobs? And I know you can't answer that.
They didn't, I don't think they used Urban Sim. I think they just manually,
And they
Changed.
did adjust the base, so that could account for a couple hundred jobs.
It's
something like-
okay. I'm just saying that I still don't trust the numbers they've given you, and we'll work towards an RTP that meets these numbers. But if we're doing well, which we all hope we are, we will far exceed these numbers.
Definitely.
And the next time we do this, they'll have different numbers, so.
Mr. Chair?
Rob, yes, sir.
Yeah. My first question was, when the original numbers, when those were developed, when did that occur?
That memo was released the last week in August, and the comment period closed on October 14th.
Okay, so it was recent.
Yes.
Okay, so they probably have already taken into account the new shopping center that we're building, and the
All the way through your entire
yeah, yeah. So it's probably incorporated that. I just hope that that Concord does exceed that, because we have visions of doing a lot more.
Well, I represent Concord, I hope you do too, but we all want to benefit.
Yeah.
But anyway, I understand. I appreciate the work that was being done, and I understand these are ballpark figures because nobody knows absolutely for sure.
And Mr. Engelman sits on the Regional Planning Committee, and unfortunately, he was not able to be there today. But one of the things that ABEG had been promising was to bring in the person who not only runs, but I guess wrote Urban Sims, and there was going to be a workshop. That is being rescheduled till after the first of the year. I didn't know if any of you at staff had gotten that message yet. We don't have a date yet, but we should be hearing soon, and then I would invite my colleagues, even if you don't sit on Regional Planning Committee, you're all members of ABAG. I'll be happy to share that information, or the staff can, so that you can sign, there's no charge. You can sign up to go and see how they did this. If as Martin says, the numbers are gelling, they're not going to change, but at least there will be an understanding of how they did this.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, we have received the report. Thank you. Item 6.0, other business. There is none. Do you need to vote on that, or okay?
it's just to receive the report.
Okay.
So moved.
So moved. First by Abelson, second by Midjob. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. 6.0, other business. I have none. I hope no one else does. 7.0, news clippings and correspondence. There aren't any, and we adjourn to our next meeting, which is Wednesday, January 4th. Next year, 2017.